Hello everyone. If this is the type of content you would like to see more of on this channel going forward, please leave a comment below and let me know. Today I'm going to be reading with very little commentary, with a lot of sarcasm in my voice. Side note, this lawsuit is about the most entitled, privileged, entertaining shit I've ever seen on the internet, I think. I have no side picked in this whole debacle. I think the entire thing is equally ridiculous on both sides. Here I'm going to be reading the amended complaint from Blake Lively's side, submitted February 18th, 2025, in the Baldoni v. Blake Lively or Blake Lively v. Baldoni. I'm not even sure at this point. This was filed in United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Blake Lively, plaintiff, versus Wayfarer Studios, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company. Justin Baldoni, an individual. Jamie Heath, an individual. Steve Sarowitz, an individual. It Ends With Us Movie, LLC, a California limited liability company. Melissa Nathan, an individual. The Agency Group, PR, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company. Jennifer Abel, an individual. Jed Wallace, an individual. And Street Relations Incorporated, a California corporation, as defendants. This is case number one. I don't know how to read these things. Case number 1:24-CV-10049-LJL, consolidated with 1:25-CV-00449-LJL. Oh, so I guess they combined the two lawsuits now. Okay. Amended complaint for sexual harassment, retaliation, breach of contract, false light, defamation, and other claims. I'm not going to go through the entire table of contents here. I will list them off briefly, and as I list them off, I will add in timestamps so you can see on the screen if you want to jump ahead. Introduction, parties, jurisdiction and venue, factual allegations, first cause of action, second cause of action, third cause of action, fourth cause of action, fifth cause of action, sixth cause of action, seventh cause of action, eighth cause of action, ninth cause of action, 10th cause of action, 11th cause of action, 12th cause of action, 13th cause of action, 14th cause of action, 15th cause of action. Is that it? Is that it? Is there more? Yay, that's it. Plaintiff Blake Lively brings this action for damages against Wayfarer Studios, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company. Justin Baldoni, an individual. Jamie Heath, an individual. Steve Sarowitz, an individual. It Ends With Us Movie, LLC, a California limited liability company. Melissa Nathan, an individual. The Agency Group, PR, LLC, a Delaware limited liability company. And Jennifer Abel, an individual. Jed Wallace, an individual, and Street Relations Incorporated, a California corporation. Introduction. Are you shitting me? Oh my God. All right, this starts off with a quote by Justin Baldoni from Why I'm Done Trying to Be Man Enough, 2017. Quote, are you confident enough to listen to the women in your life, to hear their ideas and their solutions, to hold their anguish and actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you? And will you actually stand up and do something so that one day we don't have to live in a world where a woman has to risk everything and come forward to say the words, me too, end quote. Okay, the only thing more cringe than this quote itself is using this quote in this lawsuit. And second of all, why strive to live in a world where a woman doesn't have to risk everything and come forward to say the words me too, when you could strive to live in a world where a woman doesn't have to come forward and say the words me too? One, plaintiff Blake Lively brings this lawsuit because she was unlawfully retaliated against for coming forward and reporting sexual harassment that occurred against her and others on the set of It Ends With Us, the film. Two, defendant Wayfarer Studios, LLC, Wayfarer, is the owner of the film. Defendant Justin Baldoni is the co-chairman and co-founder of Wayfarer and also served as director, executive producer, and actor in the lead role of Riley Kincaid in the film. Ms. Lively played the leading role of Lily Bloom in the film. At all times during the production, editing, and promotion of the film, Mr. Baldoni was Ms. Lively's boss. 3. For years prior to the release of the film, Mr. Baldoni portrayed himself as a leader of the male feminist movement, writing books, hosting podcasts, and holding TED Talks on the topic. Oh my God, people actually attended TED Talks to what? Have feminism mansplained to them? Holy shit. In reality, however, Mr. Baldoni's public persona is a stark contrast to his private behavior, which is replete with hypocrisy, misogyny, and retaliation. No shit. You mean a man is misogynistic? Even one who fancies himself not to be might actually be misogynistic still? No shit. 4. In public, Mr. Baldoni gave the appearance of taking responsibility for the fact that he had, quote, unconsciously been, quote, hurting and, quote, silencing the women in his life and implored men to be, quote, man enough to, quote, shut the hell up and listen to women. He claimed that he wanted to, quote, end toxic masculinity, acknowledging his own toxic behavior by admitting that, quote, there is a woman or two that I, in some way, made uncomfortable by saying something or doing something that was chauvinistic or sexist. There is 1,000,000% probability that that exists, end quote. And then he wanted to say he was, quote, sorry and would, quote, do better. Mr. Baldoni echoed this narrative while marketing the film. In an interview on CBS discussing the release of the film on August 7, 2024, he claimed, quote, I want men to stop asking the question, why do women stay? I want men to take accountability. I want men to hold other men accountable. 5. At his own moment of truth, when forced to confront women he had made uncomfortable on his own set, he trivialized their concerns and failed to take accountability for the effects of his behavior, whether intended or not. And when faced with the predictable consequences of having created a toxic set, namely that the cast did not want to appear alongside him in public, rather than holding himself accountable, Mr. Baldoni hid behind his billionaire friend and retained publicists, crisis managers, digital media strategists, and litigators to mount a sophisticated and well-funded retaliation campaign that sought to, quote, bury and, quote, destroy anyone that challenged his brand. That campaign has succeeded beyond Mr. Baldoni's wildest expectations. In fact, the defendants' actions have created such a toxic climate of online vitriol against Miss Lively, her family, other members of the cast, and various fact witnesses that all of the above have received disturbing threats. One fact witness known to publicly support Miss Lively recently received a written threat indicating that the witness's family would be sexually assaulted and killed unless the witness agreed to, quote, make a statement and give the truth. I don't care who you are, what you've done. It's fucking gross. This type of climate was the predictable, if not inevitable, result of the retaliatory campaign launched by Baldoni Wayfarer parties, both before and after the litigation began. Side note, on each page that has citations, I'm going to be including them in the little timestamp cards you'll see up in the corner as they appear in the reading. I'll be sure to make a verbal note citation too at that time, so anyone who's interested in following through with the link will know when to do so. 6. The dangerous climate of threats, harassment, and intimidation fueled by the defendant's retaliation campaign has required Ms. Lively to alter her personal and professional life and to take steps to protect innocent bystanders rather than exposing them to further harm. Thus, this amended complaint does not refer to certain witnesses by name, nor does it provide screenshots of their text messages. That's convenient. Importantly, however, these witnesses have given Ms. Lively permission to share the substance of their communications in this amended complaint as contained herein, and they will testify and produce responsive documents in the discovery process. Well, now who's the one trying to alter public opinion? I mean, that's just awfully convenient. You get to tell whatever story you want here without offering up. And the best part of this lawsuit has been the text messages. And now I feel like I'm being robbed here. You took away my ability to read the text messages. I don't believe you now. No, seriously, you took away the ability to read these text messages. That's the substance of this entire lawsuit, is the conversation, the correspondence between the parties and between those involved. You're telling whatever story you want without offering up any evidence. I think that's kind of feeding into the thing that everyone's saying about you, you know? I'm not saying it's true, but you are giving that impression now. Miss Lively brought this lawsuit because she was one of the, quote, women or two that Mr. Baldoni, quote, 1,000,000% made, quote, made uncomfortable on the set of the film. As that's not what he said. He wasn't even talking about the film when he said that. I can't believe you just did that. You completely misrepresented what he said, and you're going to build a story off it. You got the incorrect premise, and now you're going to build an entire concept or whatever on top of that, and the whole thing's going to crumble. As detailed in her opening complaint and below, Miss Lively was disturbed by the fact that Mr. Baldoni spoke about his pornography addiction, divulged information about his sex life, made derogatory, degrading, and sexual comments, described his own genitalia, improvised intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Miss Lively in advance, and added graphic content to the script, including multiple new scenes with nudity and a chaotic and volatile birthing scene for which he cast a friend as her OBGYN, among other things. 8. But Miss Lively was not the only one who was uncomfortable on set, and Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer knew it. After Mr. Baldoni learned that he had caused Miss Lively and others to feel, quote, uncomfortable, he turned his TED Talk and, quote, feminist advocacy on its head. He did not hold himself and other men, quote, accountable, or take his own advice to be, quote, confident enough to, quote, hold their anguish and actually believe them. Citation 4. But instead used a, quote, louder voice to silence Ms. Lively and anyone else who might speak up. That, quote, louder voice, amplified by publicists, crisis managers, digital media teams, and lawyers, has sought to mislead the public into believing that Ms. Lively did not experience sexual harassment by portraying her as a powerful bully who fabricated claims of misconduct in order to seize control of Mr. Baldoni's movie. This narrative is false and nonsensical on its own terms, completely at odds with Mr. Baldoni's confession to his crisis manager on August 30th, 2024, that Ms. Lively, quote, is the kind of person that genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust. And is breathtakingly cynical coming from a man whose public brand is built upon a pro-feminist facade that urges others to listen to and believe women. 9. More importantly, the defendant's false narrative crumbles under the indisputable truth that Ms. Lively was not alone in complaining about Mr. Baldoni and raised her concerns contemporaneously as they arose in 2023, not in connection with some imagined power play for control of the film in 2024. The experiences of Ms. Lively and others were documented at the time they occurred, starting in May of 2023. Importantly, and contrary to the entire narrative defendants have invented, Mr. Baldoni acknowledged the complaints in writing at the time, citation 5. He knew that women other than Ms. Lively were also uncomfortable and had complained about his behavior. 10. On May 24th, 2023, Ms. Lively confided in a text to a woman who was a mutual friend of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, quote, I was going to invite you to set tomorrow. These people, whoa, it's like HR nuts today, the both of them. I wasn't expecting that turn. I mean, it's been present, but today I came home and cried. Further in the exchange, Ms. Lively describes Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath as, quote, creeps, like keep your hormones to yourselves. This is not mine. I don't want it. I don't want your gaze or words or tongue or videos of your naked wife. Yeah, it's shocking. A few days later, on May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively reported her concerns regarding unwelcome and inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, the chief executive officer of Wayfarer and producer of the film, to Sony employee Angie Giannetti, the film's representative for its distributor, Sony Pictures Entertainment. 12. Over the following 3 days in May of 2023, another female cast member reported her own concerns regarding Mr. Baldoni's unwelcome behavior to both Ms. Giannetti and one of the film's producers. Notwithstanding that female cast members' considerable reservations with coming forward, she nonetheless spoke up and conveyed her feelings that the work on the film was suffering as a result of Mr. Baldoni's behavior. Ms. Giannetti shared those concerns with Wayfarer. 13. On June 1st, 2023, Mr. Baldoni responded to that female cast member in writing, acknowledging that he was aware of her concerns and that adjustments would be made. What a dick. 14. Notwithstanding that promise, Wayfarer took no actions to investigate this reported conduct, nor did it implement any protections at that time. Just 1 week later, on June 8th, 2023, the same female cast member told Miss Lively about her growing concerns with the conditions on set and that she found it difficult to talk to Mr. Baldoni. Miss Lively responded that, quote, I know I find it really hard to speak to him. I try to cover it with busyness, but not sure that covers what's going on. Later, another female cast member confided to Miss Lively that she too felt uncomfortable on set. All of this occurred and was documented in writing almost 1 year before the editing of the film began. 15. As a result of guild strikes, production of the film shut down on or about June 14th, 2023. In the midst of that shutdown, on October 13th, 2023, Miss Lively confided in a text to a female cast member that she was, quote, dreading going back to our film. I keep getting hits of the experience in really upsetting ways. The female cast member expressed empathy for Miss Lively and confirmed similar feelings. 16. Before returning to production following the guild strikes, based on Wayfarer's complete failure to investigate or address any of the complaints conveyed by Miss Lively and others, Miss Lively decided to speak up and require that Sony and Wayfarer agree to a set of protections to ensure a safe set for all of the cast and crew. Thus, in mid-November 2023, the parties agreed in writing to implement a list of protections enumerated in a contract entitled, quote, Protections for Return to Production. Attached hereto is Exhibit A, which included 17 provisions designed to require Wayfarer to cease on-the-set behavior of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. These provisions were designed to remedy the misconduct that Ms. Lively and others had reported earlier that year. One of those provisions required a, quote, all-hands meeting to, quote, confirm and approve a plan for implementation of certain protections that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of Ms. Lively, her employees, and all cast and crew moving forward. Exhibit A, 17. Another provision required that an experienced producer, Todd Black, be brought in to oversee production and ensure that the requested protections were adhered to for the safety of all cast and crew members. 17. Importantly, none of the requested protections were tied in any way to Miss Lively's creative input in the film and were made months before any discussions regarding the cut of the film. At that moment in time, with the completion of the film uncertain, Miss Lively did not request, nor did she receive, any creative rights, editing rights, credits, or any other role on the film beyond her roles as an actress and executive producer. Everything she requested, as laid out in the document, was designed to ensure the safety and well-being of the cast and crew. In other words, at that precise moment in time when Miss Lively had maximum leverage prior to resuming production, she did not use that leverage to obtain anything other than protections for herself and others to ensure a safe work environment for all. The notion that she did all of this as some sort of Byzantine plot to, quote, take control of the movie at some future point, which she did not do in any event, is absurd, and there's not a shred of evidence to support it. I just realized my little corner icon there looks like what I would look like if I were on an LP. 18. After receiving the document, Wayfarer responded that, quote, Wayfarer, Sony, and production respectfully acknowledge that Ms. Lively has concerns regarding safety, professionalism, and workplace culture. Although our perspective differs in many aspects, ensuring a safe environment for all is paramount, irrespective of differing viewpoints. Regarding your outlined requests, we find most of them not only reasonable, but also essential for the benefit of all parties involved. Citation 6. Following Wayfarer's agreement, Ms. Giannetti texted Ms. Lively on November 29, 2023 and said, quote, "So glad Todd Black is in it now and overseeing everything, but wanted to check in, offer anything I can. I know this has been beyond challenging to say the least. We at Studio want to support you best we can." 19. On January 4th, 2024, prior to resuming production of the film, the quote, all hands meeting that Wayfarer and Sony had agreed to in November was held in New York. Attendees of the meeting included 1. Mr. Baldoni, 2. Mr. Heath, 3. Ms. Giannetti, 4. Ms. Sachs, 5. Todd Black, 6. Ms. Lively, 7. Ms. Lively's husband, Ryan Reynolds, who Ms. Lively chose as her representative, a choice which Ms. Lively had the right to exercise under the November agreement, given that the meeting was about repeated sexual harassment and other disturbing behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, to which I have to call bullshit on that. You knew that there was going to be a power imbalance by choosing your husband, and the fact that he is your husband, in my opinion, make him one of the worst choices for this kind of situation, because he's very likely to react solely on emotion rather than legality or just common sense. And that's how it should be. He's your fucking husband. But don't act like this is why you chose him and it's a good thing. It wasn't, I don't think. 20. During the January 4 meeting, the parties discussed in detail the inappropriate conduct that Ms. Lively, her employees, and other cast and crew experienced at the hands of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Ms. Lively read the list below in its entirety, and after a discussion, all parties present agreed that the outlined conduct would cease. 1. No more showing nude videos or images of women, including producer's wife, to Blake Lively and or her employees. 2. No more mention of Mr. Baldoni's or Ms. Heath's previous pornography addiction or Blake Lively's lack of pornography consumption to Blake Lively or to other crew members. 3. No more discussions to Blake Lively and or her employees about personal experiences with sex, including as it relates to spouses or others. 4. No more mention to Blake Lively or her employees of personal times that physical consent was not given in sexual acts as either the abuser or the abused. 5. No more descriptions of their own genitalia to Blake Lively. 6. No more jokes or disparaging comments to be made to Blake Lively and or her employees about human resources complaints Wayfarer has already received on set or about, quote, missing the HR meeting. 7. No more inquiries by Mr. Baldoni to Blake Lively's trainer without her knowledge or consent to disclose her weight. Oh my God, that's exactly how you Streisand your fat ass. 8. You're not fat. I'm just saying, but that's how it's going to come off now because you're Streisanding the shit out of it. 8. No more mention by Mr. Baldoni of him, quote, speaking to Blake Lively's dead father. Now that's just asshole. 9. No more pressing by Mr. Baldoni for Blake Lively to disclose her religious beliefs or unsolicited sharing of his. That's one I can wholeheartedly get behind. 10. If Blake Lively and or her infant is exposed to COVID again, Blake Lively must be provided with immediate notice as soon as Wayfarer or any other producers become aware of such exposure without her needing to uncover days later herself. An intimacy coordinator must be present at all times when Blake Lively is on set in scenes with Mr. Baldoni. 12. No more personal, physical touching of or sexual comments by Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath to be tolerated by Blake Lively or any of her employees, as well as any female cast or crew without their express consent. 13. No more improvising of kissing. All intimate touch must be choreographed in advance with Blake Lively and an intimacy coordinator. No biting or sucking of lip without Blake Lively's consent. And all intimate on-camera touch and conversations must be, quote, in character, not spoken from Mr. Baldoni to Blake Lively personally. 14. Blake Lively to have a representative on set at all times and with a monitor during scenes involving nudity, sexual activity, or violence with Mr. Baldoni. 15. All actors participating with Blake Lively in intimate scenes involving her being in any state of nudity or simulated nudity must be classified as active working actors, not, quote, friends of the director or producers, and must be pre-approved by Blake Lively. 16. No more filming of any Blake Lively nudity without a fully executed SAG compliant nudity rider in place. Any such footage already shot without this rider in place in indirect violation of SAG requirements may not be used without Blake Lively and her legal representatives' prior written consent. 17. Any scene by Blake Lively or another performer depicting the character of, quote, Lily that involves nudity or simulated sex must be conducted strictly in accordance with the above referenced nudity rider and must adhere to the Blake Lively approved script. 18. An intimacy coordinator must be on set for all scenes involving nudity and or simulated sex and must have a monitor to ensure compliance. 19. No monitors to be viewed or accessible on set or remotely during closed set scenes except by Blake Lively approved essential crew and personnel. 20. No more attempting to enter, interrupting, pressuring, or asking Blake Lively to enter her trailer or the makeup trailer by Mr. Heath, Mr. Baldoni, while she is nude for any reason. Well, what if they go to talk to her, they knock on the door without knowing that she's changing behind the door? They would be in violation of this, would it not? 20, perhaps they should just next time send someone and be like, hey, listen, tell Blake we need to speak with her and just go from there. 21. No more private, multi-hour meetings in Blake Lively's trailer with Mr. Baldoni crying with no outside Blake Lively appointed representative to monitor. Yeah, that's kind of weird. 22. No more pressing by Mr. Baldoni to sage any of Blake Lively's employees. 23. Producer Alex Sachs to be given standard rights, inclusion, and authority per her job description and as represented to Blake Lively when signing on. 24. Sony must have an active daily role in overseeing physical production for the remainder of the film to monitor safely for cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative. And also to provide a much bigger pocket for Blake Lively to sue after the fact. 25. Engagement of an experienced producer to supervise the safety of the cast and crew, schedule, logistics, problem solving, and creative for the remainder of the shoot. Examples: Todd Lieberman, Elizabeth Cantillon, Mary Yoon, Lynette Howell. 26. Engagement of a Blake Lively approved A-list stunt double to perform Lily in scenes with Mr. Baldoni involving violence. Blake Lively to perform only close-up work or work from a Blake Lively pre-approved shot list in scenes with Mr. Baldoni involving sexual violence. 27. No more adding of sex scenes, oral sex, or on-camera climaxing by Blake Lively outside the scope of the script Blake Lively approved when signing onto the project. 28. No more asking or pressuring Blake Lively to cross physical picket lines. Yeah, I get. 29. No more retaliatory or abusive behavior to Blake Lively for raising concerns or requesting safeguards. Okay. 30. An in-person meeting before production resumes with Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, Ms. Sachs, and the Sony representative, the new producer, Blake Lively, and Blake Lively's spouse, Ryan Reynolds, to confirm and approve a plan for implementation of the above that will be adhered to for the physical and emotional safety of Blake Lively, her employees, and all cast and crew moving forward. 21. At the end of the January 4 meeting, having discussed at length the details of concerns that had been expressed by Ms. Lively and others, the parties agreed to implement and follow the protections for return to production to ensure that the film could be completed, marketed, and released safely and successfully. And it was. Production of the film resumed on January 5th and concluded on February 9th, 2024. As discussed below, the film has been a resounding success. 22. As the cast and crew returned to production on January 14th, 2024, Ms. Lively reassured a female cast member that as a result of the protections that Wayfair and Sony had agreed to, quote, "You don't need to hug anyone this time," to which the female cast member responded with gratitude. Miss Lively, okay, I may be insensitive there. I don't know. This seems awfully entitled to me. I don't know. Everyone's entitled to have these things on set, but I'm not so sure that all these violations happen, at least not to the degree in which they're being represented to have happened. In which case, it does seem a bit exploitative to use all of these arguments in these very extreme protections for something that just may not be called for. I don't know. Okay. I'm going to shut up because I'm going to piss people off. To which the female cast member responded with gratitude. Miss Lively continued that, quote, "He won't touch you, or shouldn't. I don't think he or Jamie will." Miss Lively expressed her belief that it would be, quote, "a professional set and we're getting good work." 23. Leading up to and in connection with the release of the film during the summer of 2024, Miss Lively and fellow cast members promoted the film in accordance with the marketing plan created and delivered by the film's distributor, Sony, which is summarized in the, quote, talking points attached here to as Exhibit C. Miss Lively and other cast members were under a contractual obligation to engage in media, press, marketing activities, and render promotional services in accordance with the marketing plan. The marketing plan directed the cast to, quote, "focus more on Lily's strength and resilience, as opposed to describing the film as a story about domestic violence," and to, quote, "avoid talking about this film that makes it feel sad or heavy. It's a story of hope." See Exhibit C at 2, citation 7. Wayfair endorsed this plan in an email to Sony on August 11, 2024. Mr. Heath described the marketing of the film to date as, quote, "brilliant" and, quote, "fantastic," and noted that, quote, "we are not saying it's been inappropriately marketed in any way." 24. In the days leading up to the film's release, Mr. Baldoni abruptly pivoted away from the film's marketing plan and the types of publicity activities in which he had previously participated. What the public did not know was that Mr. Baldoni and his team did so in an effort to explain why many of the film's cast and crew had unfollowed Mr. Baldoni on social media and were not appearing with him in public. To that end, he and his team used domestic violence, quote, "survivor" content to protect his public image, as described in further detail below. See paragraphs 176 to 182. 25. Other cast members contemporaneously observed Mr. Baldoni's pivot as it was happening. For example, a female cast member lamented to Miss Lively in a text on August 10th, 2024, that Mr. Baldoni's marketing pivot was jeopardizing the success of the film and opined that the pivot would not work because it would eventually come out that Mr. Baldoni was using domestic violence commentary to cover his own behavior. 26. What the public also did not know was that this was the beginning of a multi-tiered plan that Mr. Baldoni and his team described as, quote, "social manipulation," designed to, quote, "destroy" Ms. Lively's reputation. That plan was backed by virtually unlimited resources. Wayfair's co-founder, co-chairman, and leading financier is multi-billionaire Steve Sarowitz, who divulged to a witness at the film's New York premiere on August 6, 2024, that he was prepared to spend $100 million to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family. Citation 8. 27. That was not the only time Mr. Sarowitz made such a threat. Later in August 2024, even though the film had, quote, "turned out very well," and Wayfair had, quote, "made a lot of money" on it, Mr. Sarowitz confessed to another witness, an individual who was working with Wayfair on an unrelated project, that if Miss Lively or Mr. Reynolds, quote, "ever cross the line, ever, then I will go after them," unquote. He declared, quote, "I will protect the studio like Israel protected itself from Hamas. There were 39,000 dead bodies. There will be 2 dead bodies when I'm done, minimum. Not dead, but you're dead to me." So that kind of dead, but dead to a lot of people. If they ever get me to that point, then I'll make it worth their while, because I'm going to spend a lot of money to make sure the studio is protected. Like this, there was like a really, really strong threat. Then it turned kind of like a white girlish threat. But then it came back and revived itself. Okay. 28. Supported by Mr. Sarawitz's financial backing and militaristic worldview, Mr. Baldoni and his Wayfarer associates embarked on a sophisticated press and digital plan in retaliation for Miss Lively exercising her legally protected right to speak up about their misconduct on the set, with the additional objective of intimidating her and anyone else from revealing in public what actually occurred. 29. On July 31st, 2024, following the recommendation of their publicist, Jennifer Abel, Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni retained a crisis communication specialist named Melissa Nathan and her company, the agency group PR LLC. Tag. Ms. Nathan delivered a proposal to Mr. Baldoni, which included, quote, a website to discuss full Reddit, full social account takedowns, full social crisis team on hand for anything, engage with audiences in the right way, start threads of theories, discuss, and is the way to be fully 100% protected. Ms. Nathan also proposed the, quote, creation of social fan engagement to go back and forth with any negative accounts, helping to change the narrative and stay on track. Per Ms. Nathan, quote, all of this will be most importantly untraceable. As Ms. Abel described it, the plan was to engage in, quote, social media mitigation and proactive fan posting to counter the negative, as well as, quote, social manipulation. Citation 10. 30. This plan went well beyond standard crisis PR. What Ms. Nathan proposed included a practice known as, quote, astroturfing, which has been defined as, quote, the practice of publishing opinions or comments on the internet, in the media, etc., that appear to come from ordinary members of the public, but actually come from a particular company or political group. Citation 11. 31. On August 2nd, 2024, TAG circulated a, quote, scenario planning document to Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and others, which described preparations and strategy, quote, should Ms. Lively and her team make her grievances public. The scenario planning document. And is attached hereto as Exhibit D to, quote, get ahead of this narrative. Ms. Nathan's plan proposed strategies to advance misleading counter-narratives, including pushing Ms. Nathan's narrative that Ms. Lively had a, quote, less than favorable reputation, proposing to, quote, explore planting stories about the weaponization of feminism, and misleadingly blaming Ms. Lively for production members' job losses. See Exhibit D at 2 to 3. 32. Initially, Mr. Baldoni expressed concerns that TAG's written plan was insufficiently aggressive to, quote, protect him. Writing to Mr. Heath and Ms. Abel, he said he was, quote, not in love with the document they sent, not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call, and Ms. Nathan and her colleagues. In response, Mr. Heath attempted to reassure Mr. Baldoni that they had found the right people for his campaign. In Mr. Heath's words, quote, the most important part of this is how quickly they can shut things down and play stories in your favor. Screenshot of text messages between Justin and Heath. Justin says, morning, not in love with the document they sent. Not sure I'm feeling the protection I felt on the call. Heath says, this is the first time I personally gone through scenario planning with them. So I think let them discuss the thinking behind the document and the actual process and protocol of how they implement these things. That's how most important part of this is, how quickly they can shut things down and play stories in your favor. Be honest on this call and let's give real feedback to each point. Justin says, yeah, just feels very much like there's not much defense, and also them feeling strong like she's going to do something just a bit concerning, what everyone had originally thought. 33. Later that day, Ms. Abel and Ms. Nathan exchanged the following text messages, expressing that Mr. Baldoni, quote, wants to feel like Ms. Lively can be buried. Ms. Abel and Ms. Nathan agreed that, of course, they would do just that, but could not say so in writing. Quote, we can't write it down to him. We can't write, we will destroy her. Imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands. Email exchange from Jennifer or between Jennifer and Melissa. Jennifer says to Melissa, "You can of course do that, but I do think he needs to know. I'm going to confidentially send you something he's texted me and Jamie on the side just to arm you before this call. I think you guys need to be tough and show the strength of what you guys can do in these scenarios. He wants to feel like she can be buried." Melissa says to Jennifer, "Of course. But when we send over documents, we can't send over the work we will or could do because that could get us in a lot of trouble." Melissa to Jennifer says, "We can't write it down to him. We can't write, 'We will destroy her. We will go to this. We will do this. We will do this. We will do this.'" Jennifer to Melissa, "Of course not. But I told him that's the point of talking through." Melissa to Jennifer, "He has to look at it as an information document for us to be armed with. That's all. Imagine if a document saying all the things that he wants ends up in the wrong hands." 34. Miss Nathan followed this by assuring Miss Abel, quote, "We can bury anyone, but I can't write that to him." 35. A few days later, on August 5th, 2024, Mr. Baldoni set the narrative for the social media campaign, sending Miss Abel a screenshot of a thread on X that had accused another female celebrity of bullying women. Baldoni stated, quote, "This is what we would need." Screenshot of text messages. Justin to Miss Abel. Says, "This is what we would need." Miss Abel says, "Yes, I literally just spoke to Melissa about this on the break about what we discussed last night for social and digital. Focus on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram." 36. Miss Abel responded that she had just, quote, "spoken to Melissa about this, about what we discussed last night for social and digital." Miss Abel added, quote, "Focus on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram," with reassurance that Miss Lively would be, quote, "destroyed" and, quote, "buried." Wayfarer Mr. Baldoni directed Miss Nathan and her team to actively engage in the retaliatory, quote, "social manipulation campaign." 37. In the weeks and months that followed, with the direction and approval of Wayfarer and Mr. Baldoni, the team engaged in a sophisticated, coordinated, and well-financed retaliation plan. 38. The retaliation campaign relied on more than just publicists and crisis managers spinning stories. They also retained a Texas-based contractor named Jed Wallace, who weaponized a digital army around the country from New York to Los Angeles and beyond to create, seed, promote, and engage with content that appeared to be authentic on social media platforms and internet chat forums. The Baldoni Wayfarer team would then feed pieces of this manufactured content to unwitting reporters, helping to make content go viral in order to influence public opinion and thereby cause an organic pile-on. To safeguard against the risk Miss Lively ever revealing the truth about Mr. Baldoni, the Baldoni Wayfarer team created, planted, amplified, and boosted content designed to eviscerate Miss Lively's credibility. They engaged in the same techniques to bolster Mr. Baldoni's credibility and suppress any negative content about him. 39. On August 10th, the day after release of the film, Miss Nathan's team reported that they had, quote, "started to see a shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative against Miss Lively." Screenshot of an email from someone to Jennifer Abel that says, "Hi, team. So far, extremely limited pickup on Daily Mail or Page 6. We'll continue to keep an eye out and send pieces as needed, but so far, it's been steady coverage on pure speculation. We've also started to see a shift on social, due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative toward shining a spotlight on Blake and Ryan. Again, we'll continue to send leaks and screenshots, but wanted to send an update in the meantime." 40. That same day, Miss Nathan noted that as part of the shift, quote, "the majority of socials are so pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, LOL." Screenshot of email from Melissa to Jennifer says, "The majority of socials are pro-Justin, and I don't even agree with half of them, LOL." 41. Later in that same text conversation, Miss Nathan and Miss Abel described the shift in social media, which they had earlier admitted Mr. Wallace and his team had causing Miss Abel to conclude that Miss Lively deserved what was happening on social media because she had unfollowed Mr. Baldoni on social media and declined to do publicity with him. Screenshot of emails from Melissa to Jennifer states, "And socials are really, really ramping up." Again, Melissa to Jennifer. "In his favor, she must be furious." Again, Melissa to Jennifer. It's actually sad because it just shows you have people really want to hate on women. Screenshots of emails from Jennifer to Melissa that says, yeah, I know, it's sad. Again, from Jennifer to Melissa. But then, like, don't be a cunt. Again, from Jennifer to Melissa. She fucked herself by doing the unfollow thing and insisting on no photos together. 42. Defendants have admitted that on August 12th, 2024, in the midst of a massive sentiment shift on social media that was engulfing Ms. Lively and others with a flood of negative comments, Wayfarer was asked to issue a statement to help correct the situation by accepting accountability for the production it oversaw. But rather than doing so, Ms. Nathan advised that issuing such a statement would be a, quote, career killer for Mr. Baldoni, who she urged to, quote, lawyer up and, quote, fight. 43. Less than 1 week late. Seriously, I'm sorry. I'm not against Blake Lively. I'm not, but this paragraph right here just reads like she's throwing a fit because she didn't get her fucking way. 43. Less than 1 week later, they again bragged about how they had shut down stories regarding HR complaints on set. On August 15th, 2024, Ms. Nathan remarked that, quote, this went so well, it was genius. So, okay, we had the 4 majors standing down an HR complaint. Well, how did the HR complaint get out? Seems like this whole situation was the result of one PR company doing its job against another PR company doing its job. And now the people are complaining that the other PR company was doing its job against their PR company that was doing its job. Screenshots of an email from Melissa to Jennifer that reads, so okay, we have the 4 majors standing down an HR complaint. I think we're fine on that bit. 44. As their own words reveal, the purpose of this, quote, social manipulation plan was twofold. It aimed to both A, conceal the pattern of harassment and other misconduct by Mr. Baldoni, Mr. Heath, and Wayfarer, and B, retaliate against Ms. Lively by battering her image, harming her businesses, and causing her and her family severe emotional harm. Millions of people, including many reporters and influencers, who saw these planted stories, social media posts, and other online content had no idea they were unwitting consumers of a crisis PR, astroturfing, and digital retaliation campaign created and funded by Mr. Baldoni and Wayfarer to hurt Ms. Lively. This is precisely the goal of an astroturfing campaign, to light the fire and continue to stoke conversation secretly, blurring the line between authentic and manufactured content and creating viral public takedowns. 45. In just days, the retaliation campaign had resulted in the viral spread of hateful, threatening, and derogatory content directed at Ms. Lively, her family, and other female cast members, as well as harassment and cyberbullying of the same. Online hate and vitriol found its way onto the social media accounts of much of the cast of the film, Ms. Lively, Mr. Reynolds, and numerous businesses associated with them. By August 14, 2024, a female cast member texted Ms. Lively, expressing feeling concerned and helpless about the online narrative. 46. A different female cast member wrote to Ms. Lively on August 14, 2024, to ask whether she knew if Sony could help her address the cyberbullying she was experiencing, which was getting nastier and more difficult to cope with by the day. 47. As described further below, many individuals and businesses other than Ms. Lively herself began to experience vitriol, harassment, and cyberbullying around this time, demonstrating the obvious falsity of defendants' self-serving insistence since Ms. Lively's first complaint in this action, that they engaged in, quote, no proactive measures, and that this viral spread of online hatred was entirely the result of Ms. Lively's, quote, own remarks and actions during the campaign for the film. 48. Indeed, these facts are not in dispute. Mr. Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties have already admitted that Ms. Lively raised concerns multiple times. They admitted that they created a plan in case she, quote, made her grievance public, in which they planned to plant stories suggesting Ms. Lively was a, quote, bully and, quote, weaponizing feminism. They admitted that their team was able to, quote, bury anyone. They admitted that they bragged and laughed at how negatively the narrative had shifted against Miss Lively and how successful they were at, quote, confusing people. They admitted that within hours of laying out their plan, they, quote, started to see a shift on social due largely to Jed and his team's efforts to shift the narrative. Citation 12. And they did all of this despite the knowledge that Miss Lively, quote, genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust. Screenshot of a text message between someone and Justin. Justin says, okay, thank you. Yeah, I just know her personality, and this is the kind of person that genuinely believes she's right and that all of this is unjust. Someone says, she fully does. I know it. Justin says, so those people seek, quote, justice at any cost. That's why I just have a hard time believing she's done, but trusting you and grateful for you. Someone says, she looks abominable if she does anything against you. She knows it. 49. Despite all of this, they claim their plan was never implemented, and somehow the universe simply, quote, organically provided them with the exact result they planned for at the exact time they wanted it, using the exact narratives they developed. The problem for defendants is that they put their plan for an, quote, untraceable campaign in writing, and the evidence shows them commenting on the success of their plan as it unfolded. She got a point there. 50. In her opening complaint, Ms. Lively noted that she, quote, is informed and believes that Mr. Baldoni and his associates have additional astroturfing plans that they have prepared and are ready to launch at a moment's notice. That is precisely what occurred starting the moment that Ms. Lively sent a cease and desist letter to defendants on December 20th, 2024, including with it a copy of her administrative complaint filed with the California Civil Rights Department, CRD. Upon receiving the cease and desist letter, defendants leaked the administrative complaint to certain hand-selected publications to get ahead of it, gave numerous statements to the press, including blatantly false and defamatory factual allegations, and began a near-daily media and social media blitz aimed at discrediting Ms. Lively, Ms. Lively's longtime publicist, Mr. Reynolds, Disney, the New York Times, and more. Okay, wait, I got to read that sentence again. Okay. Upon receiving the cease and desist letter, defendants leaked the administrative complaint to certain hand-selected publications to get ahead of it, gave numerous statements to the press, including blatantly false and defamatory factual allegations. What? How can allegations be blatantly false, defamatory, and factual at the same time? And began a near-daily media and social media blitz aimed at discrediting Ms. Lively, Ms. Lively's longtime publicist, Mr. Reynolds, Disney, the New York Times, and more. When the fuck did Disney get involved in this? 51. On information and belief, all defendants actively participated in this enhanced retaliation campaign. Defendants' counsel threatened numerous lawsuits to sue Ms. Lively and others, quote, into oblivion, and proceeded to file 4 lawsuits in 3 jurisdictions with fantastical damages of hundreds of millions of dollars in each. On information and belief, defendants' counsel has threatened both fact witnesses, neutral commentators, and publications with lawsuits for doing nothing more than speaking out or publicly reporting unfavorable information about the defendants. But there should be a paper trail of that, right? 52. In sum, with his own misconduct exposed, Mr. Baldoni refused to take accountability for his own actions when asked. He eschewed his own advice to, quote, just shut up and finally listen to the women in our lives. And he did not have the courage to, quote, hold their anguish and actually believe them, even if what they're saying is against you. Yeah, she's got a point there. Instead, he called upon Mr. Sarowitz to fund a legal press and astroturfing campaign to ensure that Ms. Lively would be forced to, quote, risk everything to come forward. 53. The irony of Mr. Baldoni's response to Ms. Lively speaking out is that his own publicist and co-defendant, Jennifer Abel, expressed her own dislike for Mr. Baldoni, declaring, quote, I can't stand him. He's so pompous, and predicted that he would seek to blame others if necessary to protect himself. On January 14th, 2024, Miss Abel wrote that, quote, "He doesn't need a retreat. He needs to be humbled. When this movie flops, he's going to try to blame every person around him for it." She continued in another message, screenshot of an email from Jennifer Abel to someone. "He may fire us because even if we put together an amazing campaign, it's not going to change the fact that he's so unlikable and unrealistic as a leading man. There's no chemistry with him and Blake. You and I both know that she will be resistant to promote this film, and press will be reluctant to do anything with Justin without Blake being a part of it." So there, those are my thoughts. 54. On December 21st and 22nd, 2024, a female cast member who had also complained shared with Miss Lively that she couldn't believe they could do this to her, and the fact that this was happening to Miss Lively was frightening to her. 55. As laid out in this amended complaint, the Baldoni Wayfarer-led takedown of Miss Lively was the intended result of a carefully crafted, coordinated, and resourced retaliatory scheme to silence her and others from speaking out about the hostile environment that Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath created. As such, it was not only unconscionable and a breach of contract, but also illegal under both state and federal law. Ms. Lively brings this action to hold defendants accountable for the ongoing retaliation, threats, and harm they have caused Ms. Lively, other cast and crew, and all of their families. Parties. Plaintiff Blake Lively, plaintiff, is an actress, an entrepreneur who co-starred in and served as an executive producer for the film. Ms. Lively is an individual who resides in New York, New York. 57. Defendant Wayfarer Studios, LLC, Wayfarer or Wayfarer Studios, is a production company co-founded by Justin Baldoni and Steve Sarowitz. Wayfarer co-financed and produced the film through its production entity, It Ends With Us Movie, LLC, and thus was the employer of all cast and crew on set, including Ms. Lively. Wayfarer is a Delaware limited liability company with its principal place of business in California. On information and belief, no members of Wayfarer Studios, LLC are citizens of New York. On information and belief, all of Wayfarer's members are citizens of California and or Illinois. 58. Defendant Justin Baldoni is a co-founder and co-chairman of Wayfarer who co-starred, directed, and served as a producer for the film. Mr. Baldoni is an individual who resides in Santa Paula, California. 59. Defendant Jamie Heath is an individual who has been Wayfarer's chief executive officer since March 2024 and was president of Wayfarer during production of the film. Mr. Heath resides in Los Angeles, California. 60. Defendant Steve Sarowitz is a co-founder and leading financier of Wayfarer. Mr. Sarowitz is an individual who resides in Highland Park, Illinois. 61. Defendant It Ends With Us Movie, LLC is a company that entered into an agreement regarding plaintiff's acting services and regarding the contractual writer for the film. It Ends With Us Movie, LLC is a California limited liability company with its principal place of business in California. On information and belief, defendant Wayfarer is the sole member of It Ends With Us Movie, LLC. On information and belief, no members of It Ends With Us Movie, LLC are citizens of New York. On information and belief, all of the members of It Ends With Us Movie, LLC are residents of California and or Illinois. 62. Defendant Melissa Nathan is an individual who provides crisis management and communications services. Ms. Nathan launched the agency group PR LLC in January 2024. Ms. Nathan is an individual who resides in North Hollywood, California. During a portion of the relevant period, Ms. Nathan lived in Brooklyn, New York. 63. Defendant, the agency group PR LLC TAG, is a company that provides services including messaging and narrative development, media relations, crisis communications and management, and digital and social strategy. TAG is a Delaware limited liability company with its principal place of business in Santa Monica, California. On information and belief, no members of TAG are citizens of New York. Defendant 64. Defendant Jennifer Abel is CEO and founder of RWA Communications, LLC. Ms. Abel is an individual who resides in Beverly Hills, California, and provides public relations services. 65. Defendant Jed Wallace is president, director, and secretary of Street Relations Incorporated, formerly known as Street Relations LLC. Mr. Wallace is an individual who resides in Dripping Springs, Texas, and who has described himself as a self-employed, quote, PR consultant who offers, quote, crisis mitigation services. 66. Defendant Street Relations Incorporated, Street Relations, is a company that describes itself as a, quote, crisis mitigation firm engaged by clients to help navigate real-life human crisis, threats, trauma, and mental health concerns. Street Relations is incorporated in the state of California with the principal place of business in Texas. In 2008, Street Relations LLC, a California limited liability corporation, filed a statement of conversation with the Secretary of State of the state of California to convert into a general stock corporation named Street Relations. Street Relations LLC filed incorporation documents in California in 2007, and in June 2007, filing described itself as a, quote, communications, marketing, and brand/media consultation company with Mr. Wallace as its sole manager. Jurisdiction and venue. This court has original jurisdiction over the claims for relief asserted in this complaint pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1331, 28 U.S.C. 1343, A4, and 28 U.S.C. 1367. 68. Plaintiffs' Title VII causes of action arise under federal law, and plaintiffs' California claims arise from the same underlying facts and are thus so related to her federal claims that they form part of the same case or controversy. 69. This court additionally has original jurisdiction over the claims for relief asserted in this complaint pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 1332 because the matter in controversy exceeds the sum or value of $75,000, exclusive of interest and costs, and no defendant is a citizen of the same state as plaintiff. 70. This court may exercise personal jurisdiction over defendants pursuant to 301 of the New York Civil Practice Law and Rules because all defendants systematically and continuously conduct and solicit business within New York and have availed themselves of the privileges of conducting business in the state of New York. 71. This court may exercise personal jurisdiction over defendants because, as further alleged herein, defendants each participated in a civil conspiracy and, on numerous occasions, individual co-conspirators engaged in overt acts in furtherance of that conspiracy that had sufficient contacts with New York to subject their co-conspirators to jurisdiction in New York. 72. This court may exercise personal jurisdiction over defendants pursuant to 302 of the New York Civil Practice Law and Rules, including because, upon information and belief, all defendants transact and solicit business within the state, have committed the tortious acts described in this complaint within the state, and or have committed such acts outside of the state causing injury to plaintiff within the state. 73. As just a few examples, on January 4th, 2024, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, in their own capacities and as representatives of Wayfarer, met in person in New York with Ms. Lively to discuss her concerns regarding Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's harassing behavior and other on-set misconduct that started the sequence of events leading to this suit, and were directly engaged by a contract with a New York forum selection clause with Jones Work and its principal place of business in New York, and which engagement gave rise to the retaliation campaign at issue. Mr. Sarowitz threatened to ruin the lives of Ms. Lively and her family while attending the film's New York premiere in connection with his position at Wayfarer. Ms. Abel worked as an employee of Jones Work, which position directly gave rise to the retaliation campaign at issue. Wayfarer contracted with Jones Work for certain communications and public relations services that gave rise to this dispute in an agreement under which Wayfarer consented to jurisdiction in New York. Ms. Nathan conducted business from Brooklyn, New York during a portion of the relevant period in their efforts to, quote, bury Ms. Lively and to conceal Mr. Baldoni's onset behavior. Ms. Nathan, Ms. Abel, Mr. Wallace, and Street Relations Incorporated targeted New York by, among other things, communicating with or causing content to be provided to journalists, content creators, and media entities based in New York, including at least one journalist at the New York Post and another at the New York Times. And all defendants have alleged that they had a contract with the New York Times in direct connection with the publication of an article pursuant to which they had brought suit. And in connection therewith, their agent and lawyer, Mr. Friedman, made defamatory statements regarding Ms. Lively on their behalf. And each of the defendants' tortious acts caused injury to Ms. Lively, her family, and or her businesses in New York. Wow, that was a long sentence. Like, seriously, how long was that sentence? Oh my God, where did it start? I think all of 73 was the same fucking sentence. I wonder, is there like a Guinness thing for like the world's longest sentence? Because this would be a contender, I think. I don't know. 74, venue is proper in this district pursuant to 28 USC 1391B and C, because a substantial part of the events or omissions giving rise to these claims occurred in this district, and because defendants are subject to personal jurisdiction in this district. Factual allegations. A. Justin Baldoni and Jamie Heath of Wayfair engage in inappropriate and unwelcome behavior toward Ms. Lively and others on the set of It Ends With Us. 75. Mr. Baldoni launched Wayfair along with Mr. Sarowitz in 2020. Mr. Heath serves as Wayfair's chief executive officer. Mr. Sarowitz is a leading financier of Wayfair, and he, Mr. Heath, and Mr. Baldoni are all close personal friends. Under the Wayfair banner, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath have many platforms, including the Man Enough podcast, which they co-host. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath have positioned Wayfair as a male feminist platform that explores gender roles, dismantles toxic masculinity, and creates a safer and judgment-free society for women. 76. Mr. Baldoni serves not only as the co-founder and co-chairman of the studio that financed and ran production on It Ends With Us, he also served as director, executive producer, and co-lead actor playing the role of Riley Kincaid. As studio head and director, all actors, crew, and staff on the film, including Ms. Lively, answered to Mr. Baldoni. In his words, he was, quote, the leader who sat, quote, at the top of this totem pole. While Sony was the distributor releasing the film, Wayfair was responsible for the production, and Wayfair was led by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. 77. Production of the film began in early May 2023 and lasted until it was suspended in mid-June 2023 due to the Writers Guild of America, WGA, strike. 78. During that time, Ms. Lively and other cast and crew experienced invasive, unwelcome, unprofessional, and sexually inappropriate behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath. Because Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath held all leadership positions on the production, they answered to no one and brushed off or ignored the concerns Ms. Lively and others expressed. A. Mr. Baldoni ignored well-established industry protocols in filming intimate scenes and exploited the lack of controls on set to behave inappropriately. 79. Wayfair failed to adhere to guild rules, as well as Ms. Lively's contract and standard industry safety protocols with respect to nudity and intimate scenes, which the Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, SAG-AFTRA, acknowledges, quote, place performers in uniquely vulnerable situations, citation 13. Such safeguards ignored by Wayfair include providing performers with appropriate notice of nudity and simulated sex and ensuring that, 1, consent is given free of pressure or coercion. 2, signed, quote, nudity rioters, and are in place spelling out the parameters of nudity or simulated sex scenes. 3, quote, safe and secure working conditions that are not detrimental to a performer's health, safety, morals, and career. Citation 14. And 4, the use of, quote, intimacy coordinators to observe intimate scenes. Citation 15. 80. Without these protections in place, Mr. Baldoni improvised physical intimacy that had not been rehearsed, choreographed, or discussed with Ms. Lively, with no intimacy coordinator involved. For instance, Mr. Baldoni discreetly bit and sucked on Ms. Lively's lower lip during a scene in which he improvised numerous kisses on each take that were not pre-approved in the script and without an intimacy coordinator there. Mr. Baldoni insisted on shooting the full scene over and over again, well beyond what would have been required on an ordinary set and without advance notice, conversation, or consent. 81. On another occasion, Mr. Baldoni and Miss Lively were filming a slow dance scene for a montage scene, meaning that none of the sound recorded while filming the scene was meant to be used in the film. Music was intended to play over the action. Nonetheless, microphones were live to pick up, quote, room tone, but not conversations or dialogue to be used in the film. The scene in the script specifically described dancing without dialogue and did not include any intimate conduct or kissing. Screenshot of part of the script. Extension bar night. Lily and Riley slow dance in the bar, patrons around them drinking and watching sports, completely in their own world. 82. Mr. Baldoni did not provide notice or seek consent for any intimacy in advance. Instead, Mr. Baldoni chose to spontaneously improvise the scene while the cameras were rolling. During the filming, Mr. Baldoni repeatedly leaned in toward Miss Lively, attempting to kiss her, kissing her forehead, rubbing his face and mouth against her neck, putting his thumb to her mouth, and flicking her lower lip, caressing her and telling her how good she smells. None of this took place while Mr. Baldoni was, quote, in character as Riley, because both the intimacy and dialogue departed from what had been agreed to in the script. Miss Lively was uncomfortable and kept leading away and repeatedly suggesting and then begging that their characters should just talk. She tried to use levity and, quote, creative pleas to deflect the unwanted touching, hoping to get through the scene in a way that maintained a professional boundary without antagonizing Mr. Baldoni. Citation 16. The video footage of the scene shows Miss Lively to be trapped, having to appear as though her character was happy and in love while the cameras were rolling. Miss Lively did not want to film additional takes on the scene, but continued to participate to be a team player and support the production in real time while simultaneously expressing and holding physical boundaries against Mr. Baldoni's advances. Miss Lively even referred to Mr. Baldoni as a, quote, sociopath at one point during the exchange. Notwithstanding Miss Lively's attempts at humor and levity, her words, actions, and body language all evince her lack of consent. When Miss Lively later objected to this behavior, Mr. Baldoni's response was, quote, not even attracted to you. 83. In January of 2025, the defendants, through their attorney Brian Friedman, released this video to the media, apparently hoping that the mere act of releasing the footage would mislead the public into believing that it shows nothing abnormal or improper. But the footage by itself corroborates Miss Lively's description of the scene to the letter. This is not just Miss Lively's view, as Maya Schechter, an independent and, quote, experienced intimacy coordinator, noted in response to an inquiry from the Hollywood Reporter. The footage shows Mr. Baldoni, quote, trying to kiss her, and they clearly haven't discussed that ahead of time, and she keeps pulling away and clearly doesn't want to do that. Improved intimacy in the scene would not have been flagged for an intimacy coordinator in advance. Ms. Schechter explained, because in the script, quote, they're just slow dancing. There's not any mention of any kind of physical intimacy. As she explained, even though Miss Lively is, quote, not powerless, she, quote, still has to keep working with him and keep the peace and play nice. And, quote, I can just see her trying to stay lighthearted and in good spirits about it and not upset him or anybody and not waste anyone's time. But of course, she is trapped between a rock and a hard place. I can see her appeasing him and trying to keep a smile on her face. She continued, quote, in terms of the hierarchy on a set, he is in charge. Even though Miss Lively is, quote, the star, she observed, quote, he is the director and she's supposed to take direction from him. Ultimately, the fact that Mr. Baldoni, the director, without advance consent, quote, just went for it, then, quote, did it again after she, quote, pulled away, is, quote, pretty damning both as an actor and a director. Citation 17. Neither Miss Lively nor any of her agents had any contact with Miss Schechter nor were they even made aware of the Hollywood Reporter article until it was published. Nonetheless, on information and belief, Mr. Friedman sent letters threatening potential legal claims to both Ms. Schechner and the Hollywood Reporter following the publication of the article. 84. Ms. Lively complained about inappropriate behavior as early as May 2023, which occurred without an intimacy coordinator present, and which ultimately led to Wayfair and Sony agreeing with Ms. Lively that the consistent presence of an intimacy coordinator was, quote, not only reasonable, but essential. Contrary to defendants' assertions elsewhere, Ms. Lively did not, quote, refuse to meet with the film's intimacy coordinator. She said she did not meet with her before production started because there were no intimate scenes in the immediate future, so they could talk once production began. Ms. Lively did have a call with the intimacy coordinator during preparations. Those conversations happened close in time to the filming of the relevant scenes. Elsewhere, Mr. Baldoni has blamed the intimacy coordinator for supposedly writing graphic new sex scenes, including foreplay and orgasms, and talking about a, quote, clit. Wayfair amended complaint, Exhibit A, DKT 50-1 at 15. But Ms. Lively consented to the sex scenes in the script as written at the time she signed on to the film, and Mr. Baldoni did not have consent to rewrite and add sex scenes, even if he did so with an intimacy coordinator. The purpose of the intimacy coordinator is to work with the actors to establish the appropriate boundaries based on what is in the script, not to rewrite the script to add more sexual content to satisfy the director's demands. B. Mr. Baldoni inserted improvised, gratuitous sexual content and or scenes involving nudity into the film, including for an underage character, in highly unsettling ways. 85. After Ms. Lively signed onto the movie based on a draft of the script, Mr. Baldoni, without Ms. Lively's knowledge or consent, personally added graphic content, including a scene in which Ms. Lively was to orgasm on camera. 86. When Ms. Lively objected to these additions, Mr. Baldoni insisted he had added them because he was making the film, quote, through the female gaze. Although he agreed to remove the scenes, he made a last-ditch attempt to keep one in which the couple orgasmed together on their wedding night, which he said was important to him because he and his partner climaxed simultaneously during intercourse. Mr. Baldoni then intrusively asked Miss Lively whether she and her husband climaxed simultaneously during intercourse, which Miss Lively found invasive and refused to discuss. 87. On the day of shooting the scene in which Miss Lively's character gives birth, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath suddenly pressured Miss Lively to simulate full nudity, despite no mention of nudity for the scene in the script, excerpt below, her contract, or in previous creative discussions. Screenshot of part of the script, which says, find Lily in the middle of intense labor, Riley entering, wearing his scrubs, having just run from another side of the hospital, bursting with nerves. He rushes to her side, puts his hand on the railing. She puts her hand on his and grips it hard. In a series of quick cuts, in a blur of pain and heavy breathing, Lily squeezing Riley's hand with every push. Doctor, she's crowning. Just a few more pushes. Riley, you're doing great. Almost there. Nurse, don't let it go. Keep bearing. One final Herculean push and scream, and the doctor holds the baby up. Riley, there she is. You did it. She's here. That's our baby girl. As Riley cuts the umbilical cord, the baby is placed on Lily's chest, the absolute greatest moment of her life. Lily speaks to her as if they're the only two people in the world. There you are. Hi, my angel. It's your mama. Later, we find the infant child on Lily's chest again, but now she's been cleaned and swaddled in a blanket. Lily and Riley can do nothing but stare at her. 88. Mr. Baldoni insisted to Miss Lively that women give birth naked and that his wife had, quote, ripped her clothes off during labor. He claimed it was, quote, not normal for women to remain in their hospital gowns while giving birth. Miss Lively disagreed, but felt forced into a compromise that she would be naked from below the chest down. Citation 18. To which, yeah, most women will still wear the gown, but Why would she have to come? I mean, who gives birth with pants on? 89. When the birth scene was filmed, the set was chaotic, crowded, and utterly lacking in standard industry protections for filming nude scenes, such as choreographing the scene with an intimacy coordinator, having a signed nudity rider, or simply turning off the monitors so the scene was not broadcast to all crew on set and on their personal phones and iPad. Mr. Heath and Mr. Baldoni also failed to close the set, allowing non-essential crew to pass through while Miss Lively was partially nude from below the chest down with her legs spread wide in stirrups and only a small piece of fabric covering her genitalia. Contrary to the Wayfarer party's contention, the production did not maintain a closed set. Among the non-essential persons present that day was Wayfarer co-chairman Mr. Sarowitz, who flew in for one of his few set visits. Miss Lively was not provided with anything with which to cover herself between takes until after she had made multiple requests. Miss Lively became even more alarmed when Mr. Baldoni introduced his, quote, best friend to play the role of the OBGYN, when ordinarily a small role of this nature would be filled by a local actor. Miss Lively felt that the selection of Mr. Baldoni's friend for this intimate role, in which the actor's face and hands were in close proximity to her nearly nude genitalia for a birth scene, was invasive and humiliating. 90. To add insult to injury, Mr. Heath approached Miss Lively and her assistant on set and started playing a video of a fully nude woman with her legs spread apart. Miss Lively thought he was showing her pornography and stopped him. Mr. Heath explained that the video was his wife giving birth. Miss Lively was alarmed and asked Mr. Heath if his wife knew he was sharing the video, to which he replied, quote, she isn't weird about this stuff. As if Miss Lively was weird for not welcoming it. Miss Lively and her assistant excused themselves, stunned that Mr. Heath had shown them a nude video. 91. Mr. Baldoni added a detailed scene to the film in which the underage version of Miss Lively's character, Lily, loses her virginity. In both the book and the script for the film, there was no sex scene. Instead, the details about this moment were left to the audience's imagination. But Mr. Baldoni added in considerable details, which was particularly concerning to Miss Lively given Mr. Baldoni's other behavior and directorial choices as detailed in this complaint. These additional details included both dialogue between young Lily and her boyfriend, Atlas, about the loss of her virginity, as well as a simulated sex scene in which Mr. Baldoni filmed and included in his initial cut of the film a brief close-up of young Lily's face accompanied by an audible gasp at the moment of penetration. Miss Lively was informed that when this scene was shot, after Mr. Baldoni called cut, he walked over to the actors and said, quote, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but that was hot. And, quote, did you two practice this before? C. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath discussed their personal sexual experiences and previous porn addiction and tried to pressure Miss Lively to reveal details about her intimate life. 92. During a car ride with Miss Lively, her assistant and driver, Mr. Baldoni claimed to Miss Lively that he had been sexually abused by a former girlfriend, which he has since shared publicly. At the end of the story, Mr. Baldoni shared that it had caused him to re-examine his past. He then said, quote, did I always ask for consent? No. Did I always listen when they said no? No. Mr. Baldoni claimed this was an example of how we all have things from which we can learn and grow. Miss Lively was alarmed by Mr. Baldoni's suggestion that he had engaged in sexual conduct without consent. When Miss Lively exited the car, her driver immediately remarked that he did not want Miss Lively to be alone with Mr. Baldoni going forward. I wonder if that's supposed to say when Mr. Baldoni exited the car, maybe. I don't know. 93. Later in July 2024, in connection with another discussion, Ms. Lively recounted this consent story to a female cast member in a text exchange. Quote, it's crazy how above reproach they feel. It's like he said to me about his previous sexual encounters when we were in my car with my assistant and my security. He said, have I always asked for consent? No. Have I always listened when they said no? No. People show you who they are. Believe them the first time. 94. In fact, Mr. Baldoni publicly acknowledges that he has struggled with consent. He echoed language similar to the words he spoke to Miss Lively in the car ride described above in a podcast interview, in which he admitted that he had, quote, crossed boundaries and lines in my teens and 20s with respect to obtaining consent, a flaw which he blamed on his early exposure to pornography. Quote, you start to think that is what women want. And in porn, as we know, no means yes or try harder. Citation 19. 95. On the first day of production, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath described their past sexual relationships to Miss Lively, including that one of them used to, quote, hook up with a woman. Mr. Baldoni said that he had decided the woman wasn't, quote, the one. So then Mr. Heath had gotten together with her. Miss Lively found this description of passing along a woman to be disrespectful and disturbing. 96. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath often spoke of their, quote, previous pornography addiction. Mr. Baldoni would often reference pornography to Miss Lively. Hoping to shut the subject down, she said to him privately that she had never seen it. Later, when Mr. Baldoni was once again referencing his experiences with pornography, he revealed in front of other cast and crew that Miss Lively had never, quote, seen porn. It was an incredible invasion of her privacy to discuss any aspect of her intimate life with the cast and crew, much less reveal something that she had only told Mr. Baldoni to try to get him to stop talking about the subject with her. 97. Mr. Baldoni engaged in other behaviors that were shocking and emotionally distressing. For example, he claimed he could speak to the dead, and on several occasions told Miss Lively that he had spoken to her recently deceased father. On one occasion, when he claimed to have spoken with Miss Lively's dead father, a person whom Mr. Baldoni had never met, Miss Lively attempted to deflect the comment with humor, telling Mr. Baldoni, quote, let him know he owes me $40. Mr. Baldoni replied, quote, wait, does he really? Miss Lively was shocked that Mr. Baldoni was pushing the conversation further and replied with another attempt at a humorous deflection, stating, quote, oh God, no, he owes me so much more than that. Mr. Baldoni then closed his eyes, put his hand on his heart, and said, quote, I was leaving my apartment this morning, and I reached into my pocket, and there was $40 in there that I did not put there. This exchange deeply disturbed Miss Lively, and it was not, as defendants have since claimed, limited to Mr. Baldoni simply claiming to pray for her father. 98. That is kind of fucked up. That is. 98. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath were also constantly hugging and touching cast and crew. When Miss Lively or others avoided this touching, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath would retaliate by becoming irritated, cold, and uncollaborative. The result was an unwelcoming and mercurial environment for Miss Lively, her employees, and others on set. D. Mr. Baldoni objectified Miss Lively and other women by commenting on or criticizing their bodies as sex objects. 99. Mr. Baldoni often referred to women in the workplace as, quote, sexy. When they expressed discomfort, Mr. Baldoni would deflect or try to pass it off, which undermined Miss Lively and others' concerns. For example, on one occasion that Miss Lively observed, he told a female cast member that her leather pants looked, quote, sexy when she arrived to the set. When she rebuffed his comment because she was uncomfortable, rather than apologizing, he brushed it off with, quote, I can say that because my wife is here today. Miss Lively felt embarrassed witnessing this kind of commentary, as did others. 100. Defendants have claimed that Mr. Baldoni's description of female cast members as, quote, sexy was justified by the fact that Miss Lively also sometimes used the word, quote, sexy on set. This claim displays a stunning lack of understanding as to context and informs the appropriate versus inappropriate use of language. The word, quote, sexy is not inherently inappropriate, but it can be inappropriate in certain contexts. Miss Lively or Mr. Baldoni using the word, quote, sexy in a creative space related to the plot or in reference to a character is not problematic. What was inappropriate and what Miss Lively objected to was her employer, Mr. Baldoni, personally describing her as sexy out of character. 101. On another day, Miss Lively wore a low-cut dress to facilitate breastfeeding, but had it covered up with a coat. When the jacket briefly popped open at one point to reveal the dress, Mr. Baldoni commented about how much he liked her outfit, which flustered Miss Lively. Later that day, Mr. Baldoni pressured Miss Lively, who was in her pre-approved wardrobe, to remove her coat in front of the crew and multiple background actors in a packed bar. He said that he wanted to see her, quote, onesie under the coat because it was zipped low to reveal her lace bra. Consistent with past practice, he said, quote, I think you look sexy, in a tone that made her feel ogled and exposed. With other female cast members present, she said, quote, it's not what I'm going for. He bristled and replied, quote, I'm sorry, hot. Deeply uncomfortable, Miss Lively said, quote, not that either. Mr. Baldoni responded sarcastically, quote, I guess I missed the HR meeting, and walked away. Another woman on the production spoke to Miss Lively afterward to offer empathy and to share her own similar experiences with Mr. Baldoni, commenting about her in sexual terms. 102. As a result of Mr. Baldoni's behavior, on May 29, 2023, another cast member lodged a sexual harassment complaint about Mr. Baldoni's, quote, gross and, quote, unwanted comments toward her and others. 103. While on one hand, Mr. Baldoni was objectifying Miss Lively as a sex object, on the other hand, he went out of his way to message criticisms of her age and weight, neither of which she could change during filming. On the second day of filming, for example, Mr. Baldoni made the rest of the cast and crew wait for hours until he cried in Miss Lively's dressing room, claiming social media commentators were saying that Miss Lively looked old and unattractive based on paparazzi photos from the set. Miss Lively tried to reassure him that she should look authentic in the scenes depicted in the photos, which were just after her character had been abused by her fictional husband, rather than, quote, hot. Mr. Baldoni, however, appeared focused on Miss Lively's sexual appeal above all else. His lengthy outburst caused a delay in shooting, forcing an emotional scene to be shot haphazardly. 104. To make matters worse, when Miss Lively tried to have a meeting with Mr. Heath and the other producers to discuss Mr. Baldoni's unprofessional behavior described above, that meeting turned into yet another violation. Rather than an ordinary meeting time and place, Mr. Heath arrived unannounced at Miss Lively's hair and makeup trailer while she was topless and having body makeup removed by makeup artists. Miss Lively told Mr. Heath that she was almost done and they could meet once she was clothed. Mr. Heath, however, insisted that if she did not allow him into her trailer to speak to him at that moment, then there would be no meeting with the other producers. Miss Lively reluctantly agreed, but asked that Mr. Heath keep his back turned. A few minutes into the conversation, Miss Lively noticed that Mr. Heath was staring directly at her while she was topless. When she called him out, Mr. Heath brushed it off as a habit of wanting to look at a person while speaking to them. Miss Lively and her hair and makeup artist were all deeply disturbed by this interaction on just the second day of filming. 105. Throughout filming, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath invaded Miss Lively's privacy by entering her makeup trailer uninvited while she was undressed, including when she was breastfeeding her infant child. Miss Lively often had to work while breastfeeding, which she felt comfortable doing so long as she was given the time and space to cover herself. She did this frequently because she was not given breaks to feed her baby. Citation 20. But Miss Lively did not expect or consent to anyone entering her private spaces while topless, exposed, and vulnerable with her newborn or during body makeup application or removal. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath both showed a shocking lack of boundaries by invading her personal space when she was undressed and vulnerable. Defendants have claimed that these intrusions were Miss Lively's fault because she texted Mr. Baldoni on one occasion that she was, quote, just pumping in my trailer if you want to work out our lines. This misunderstands the difference between a woman pumping on her own terms having taken the necessary steps to make herself comfortable, covering herself and ensuring the conditions are appropriate for the task, and walking in on someone without notice or permission while they are breastfeeding or otherwise in a state of partial undress. The critical distinction is consent. Miss Lively's one-time invitation was neither free license to join her immediately in her trailer, nor was it a general invitation to freely walk into her trailer at any time uninvited. And it certainly was not licensed to enter Miss Lively's trailer when she refused consent. The fact that Mr. Baldoni, who has repeatedly preached the importance of consent while giving media interviews or in public speaking events, now claims otherwise with respect to his own behavior displays breathtaking hypocrisy. You know, there's a scenario where what if a man was walking down the street with really tight jeans on and you could see the whole outline of his wallet and it looked like it was a big fat wallet. And then his female neighbor just tackles him, steals his wallet and takes off with it. Well, when he then goes to get his wallet back and he's bitching about it, or he files a report, what if the female neighbor said, well, what do you mean? Well, he gave me money before, or he bought me dinner once before. So yeah, why can't I have his wallet? He's just flashing it around right in front of me, teasing me with it, with this big fat wallet and these tight jeans. He was asking for it. He had it coming. If it's absurd in one scenario, it's absurd in the other. 106. Mr. Baldoni also routinely degraded Miss Lively by finding back-channel ways of criticizing her body and weight. A few weeks before filming began, and less than 4 months after Miss Lively had given birth to her 4th child, Miss Lively was humiliated to learn that Mr. Baldoni secretly called her fitness trainer without her knowledge or permission, and implied that he wanted her to lose weight in 2 weeks. Mr. Baldoni told the trainer that he had asked because he was concerned about having to pick Miss Lively up in a scene for the movie, but there was no such scene. In later text messages sent to his team, Mr. Baldoni referred to Miss Lively's trainer as, quote, a damn spy, and sought to plant stories to portray his concerns as being motivated by his lower back pain. 107. Miss Lively was not alone in her view that Mr. Baldoni's discussion with her trainer was uncomfortable and inappropriate. In fact, on January 29, 2025, following Mr. Baldoni's $400 million lawsuit against Miss Lively and others, Miss Lively's trainer edited the caption of an Instagram post he had originally posted on July 25, 2024, of himself and Miss Lively and his wife to share his views on this issue publicly. He wrote that since he had originally posted the picture, quote, there have been negative comments on this post, negative comments sent to my wife, and believe it or not, negative comments sent to my children. He explained that, quote, Justin Baldoni is not my client. I created a complimentary program for him as a favor to a client. He noted that he had helped to find, quote, him a coach and, quote, after an uncomfortable conversation, communication ended. 108. When Miss Lively caught strep throat, Mr. Baldoni offered as a, quote, gift to connect her with an expert he had on retainer to help her with probiotics and to combat the sickness. When Miss Lively went to fill out the privacy forms, she saw that the expert was not what Mr. Baldoni had represented her to be, but was instead a weight loss specialist. Miss Lively felt, once again, that Mr. Baldoni was shaming her for her body and weight. 109. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath had also filed 109. Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath also failed to implement COVID protocols when there was a COVID outbreak on set. Miss Lively was told by another producer that because Wayfarer did not have insurance coverage for COVID, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath deliberately withheld from Miss Lively that she had been exposed to COVID. Both Miss Lively and her infant child contracted COVID from the outbreak. That's not right. B. Miss Lively and others lodged grievances regarding the conduct of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, which Wayfarer declines to investigate. 110. As the studio producing the film, Wayfarer was the employer of all the cast and crew and was thus responsible for ensuring workplace safety on set. 111. However, Wayfarer failed to provide Miss Lively with even rudimentary employment protections, such as employee handbook, sexual harassment policy, information or any training on sexual harassment, discrimination, or respectful workplace expectations. 112. Wayfair also failed to provide Ms. Lively with information about the process and procedure for filing human resources (HR) complaints. 113. As the producer and owner of the film, Wayfair was legally obligated to address HR-related concerns or complaints. To Ms. Lively's knowledge, however, Wayfair lacked any process for responding to complaints about its leadership, Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, who plainly were not going to investigate themselves. 114. Wayfair, Mr. Baldoni, and Mr. Heath received or were aware of a number of HR grievances regarding their conduct. They admitted as much from day one, for example. They admitted as much from day one. For example, on the first day of filming, while attempting to hug Ms. Lively's employee, Mr. Heath said, quote, "I don't even know if we're allowed to do this. It's day one and we have an HR report already." 115. He sure talks about HR a lot. Contemporaneous messages with witnesses prove that Ms. Lively's concerns about Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath and others' concerns began early in the pre-production and production process, long before the editorial process began. Because of the lack of protocols, Ms. Lively initially struggled to find a way to navigate the increasingly troubling behavior to which she was subjected on set. On or about May 23, 2023, during a particularly difficult day on set, she and a female cast member talked to each other about how uncomfortable they were both feeling. That same cast member later reached out to Ms. Lively by text to express appreciation and relief to be able to commiserate about their shared experiences. Ms. Lively, upset with the inappropriate working conditions to which they were both subjected, thanked her for her support in speaking up, writing, quote, "Thank you for taking the time to say this, and also for taking the time at your lunch. I felt untethered today and you grounded me. I'm sorry for what you experienced, and I wish I would have been there to witness it for you. And not that you need me to, but I sure would have loved to have run my mouth about it. Thank you for not only witnessing me, but for coming in with such eloquent and safe backup. You were able to be bold without being inflammatory, which is such a tightrope, and I really appreciate it." 116. On May 24th, 2024, both Ms. Lively and the female cast member discussed how they were both feeling uneasy on set that day. Ms. Lively confided that she felt, quote, like she needs to say something tonight after wrap, but that she's, quote, not sure how to navigate it, to which her cast member responded by offering words of support. That same day, on May 24th, 2023, Ms. Lively confided in another woman who was a mutual friend of Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath, quote, "I was going to invite you to set tomorrow. These people, whoa." Ms. Lively continued in response to a message from the woman by stating, quote, "It's like HR nuts today, the both of them. I wasn't expecting that turn. I mean, it's been present, but today I came home and cried." Further in the exchange, Ms. Lively describes Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath as, quote, "creeps. Like, keep your hormones to yourself. This is not mine. I don't want it. I don't want you gaze or words or tongue or videos of your naked wife. Yeah, it's shocking. Clowns." 118. Meanwhile, Ms. Lively and a female cast member discussed a plan to speak with Angie Giannetti, the Sony executive assigned to the production. On May 26, 2023, that cast member reached out to Ms. Lively to ask if she had talked to Ms. Giannetti and informed Ms. Lively that her manager knows Ms. Giannetti and would be willing to offer support. Ms. Lively responded that she had spoken with Ms. Giannetti for 45 minutes. When Ms. Lively reached out to Ms. Giannetti, who was supportive, Ms. Giannetti texted Ms. Lively that, quote, "What I did want to review or discuss feels very, very small in light of today's news. I'm so sorry. I'm calling you in moments." Screenshot of an email from Angie to, I guess, Blake. Says, "I will say what I did want to review, discuss feels very, very small in light of today's news. I'm so sorry. Calling you in moments." 120. In that conversation with Ms. Giannetti on May 26, 2023, Ms. Lively told her that she wanted to file an HR complaint about both Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's misconduct. Although she was sympathetic, Ms. Giannetti told Ms. Lively that Sony as the distributor of the film, was not empowered to oversee physical production, which included Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath's behavior on set, and that such concerns must be raised with Wayfarer, the studio responsible for the production. Miss Lively was concerned with this response because Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath were the chairman and CEO of Wayfarer, and Mr. Baldoni was the director of the film. Miss Lively did not believe that either Mr. Baldoni or Mr. Heath would investigate their own alleged misconduct, and that this belief was proven by subsequent events. 121. In the meantime, following through on her prior text, the female cast member also had her managers contact Miss Giannetti to discuss that cast member's own discomfort with behavior by Mr. Baldoni and Mr. Heath and its negative impact on the work. The remainder of the text